record it?
Okay, it's recording.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to introduce it and then we can edit out this later
Yeah.
if it gets published. So I'll introduce it and then I'll throw it over to you pretty quickly. Okay. So we'll go for like hour and a half, 2 hours.
Yeah.
And okay. And we can do a fake goodbye for the audience and then we can chat for a little bit after that if you want.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Here we go. Oh, just one other thing. I have a there's a football game going on nearby me, so I hope you can't hear that. It might be distracting to me a little, but I think the sounds will get filtered out by my mic. Could you hear any extraneous noise besides me?
I haven't noticed any so far yet.
Okay, good. Um, if I seem distracted, that's why, but I'll try to focus. Okay, here we go. Welcome to another episode of the Dan Norton Show. Today, I am here with Evolutionary Capitalist. This is someone who saw some of my videos online and then he reached out to me and was interested in having a conversation. So here we are. Welcome to the show. Are you there?
Hey Dan.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, hey Dan.
Okay, great. So why don't you just say a little to introduce yourself to my audience, maybe a little bit about your background and then what your interests are and what you'd like to talk about today.
Yeah. My interests are like I studied math and econ in college, primarily math. Just did econ on the side just as kind of electives, but I was really interested in econ. I just didn't see any, good job prospects relative to mathematics, but learning math, science, and econ, I thought I kind of thought that this is the key to morality. And so I looked at the ethical theories out there to explain morality because I've always had a side interest in it. And I thought game theory had the best answers to morality. And so I I looked at the what was out there, the existent definitions of capitalism. I thought I thought morality would be some type of, you know, um, combination of utilitarianism and capitalism. And I tried to refine it with what I know is true or what I believe to be true. And I've come up with my flavor of capitalism, which is evolutionary capitalism, which is a economic and moral system that acknowledges that there's a great natural force called general evolution, and it imposes a goal on us that through the natural selection process, and that natural selection process and force dictates what morality is. I think it gave us morality in order to align our actions with its goal. And so I tried to see if capitalism somehow fits this, and I thought it did. Just some refining because it some has some elements of like the ideas of natural right theory from democracy, which I wanted to remove. I wanted to see if capitalism could somehow survive using purely a market ethic that was driven solely by the natural selection process, which I think is truly the invisible hand that Adam Smith was referring to. And so, yeah, that's how I constructed evolutionary capitalism. So it's a capitalist system purely based on it takes the idea of private property, but removes the idea of natural right theory. There's just private property for profit for the benefit of evolution's goal. And I primarily use game theory to justify my beliefs, and that's pretty much it. And
Okay.
I
Well, thanks
and
for the
I just want to add, I kind of reject libertarianism. So again, I reject natural rights. I reject the idea of liberty for as a valid goal, as a valid moral goal. That's it.
Okay. Thanks for that overview. There's a lot to get into there, and I'm not sure I fully grasped it all in the first pass, but maybe if we go over some of that again, it'll sink in better. So, um, I am very interested in Ayn Rand's philosophy, as my audience knows, and as you probably know. And uh, Ayn Rand is very well known for supporting capitalism. Now, what she means by capitalism, I'm not sure if that's the same thing that you mean by capitalism. That's something we could talk about, but it seems like the way you're approaching, if it is the same thing, then the angle you're coming at it from seems to be quite different because Rand doesn't talk about evolution much in her writing, if at all. I don't know that she does discuss evolution, but it seems like evolution is a very important part of your way of thinking about capitalism. So maybe we can do a little compare contrast there to bring out what the differences are.
Yeah.
And you did mention libertarianism at the end. Let me just say that that term, depending on what you mean by it, it could mean something very different from Ayn Rand's philosophy. She's often called a libertarian, or people who follow her are often called. I am often called a libertarian, but I don't really like that label because it's often associated with views that I disagree with strongly, like anarchy. Rand was very opposed to anarchy. She thought there should be a state, there should be a government, but it should be limited in its scope. So I would just want to make that point at the outset. I don't want there to be confusion about what libertarianism means, but we can talk about that some more. So I've said a few things in response to your opening. So let me just throw it back to you and see what direction you want to go from here.
Yeah. So, what's your definition of government? You see,
Government.
I thought I
The
remember in one of our past conversations, you kind of mentioned that it's somehow privately, voluntarily funded or something like that.
Yeah, we talked a little before we had this recorded call for the audience's information. So yeah, I was saying that I do think there should be a government, but it should be privately funded by voluntary means. It shouldn't be funded by coercive means, such as taxation, where you are forced by the state to give up some of your income, and if you don't, you're threatened with jail. I oppose that coercion, and I think there are voluntary means, which Rand discusses. She has an article in her book, The Virtue of Selfishness, called "Government Financing in a Free Society," and she mentions some ideas about how a government could be funded by voluntary means. To do that, I think the government has to be massively restricted in its scope compared to what it does today. Essentially, it should just have a police force, an army, and a court system, but it shouldn't have there shouldn't be a massive welfare state that costs billions or trillions of dollars to fund, with huge programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, welfare, and a vast regulatory bureaucracy with all these alphabet agencies, the SEC, FDA, et cetera. So if you get rid of all that and you just restrict the function of government to the role of protecting people from force, which is basically what the police and the army do, and then protecting the courts peacefully settle disputes among people, so private citizens don't have to resort to force if they have a dispute. If that's all the government is, then I think it's much more plausible that it could be funded by voluntary means.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I had
And I
some,
have some videos about that on my channel if anyone wants to look into that further.
yeah, maybe send that to me after you probably review the video because I'll probably forget it as we go. But I like to look at that because first off I don't believe taxation is theft because you have to own the underlying land you're on before you can call taxation, which is a fee on your production, theft. And I don't think since we're born on collective property, I don't think necessarily that's theft. So I do think modern democracy is compatible with libertarianism. I believe in that case we are free as long as we can leave. I think that's the only thing a collective uh, owes a newborn within on their property. So, and also, you know, so I don't believe in. Oh, I wanted to ask a clarifying question. Did Ayn Rand believe in the democratic system to somehow manage that rights protection force or government, as you call it?
Limited democracy. So there's a distinction between limited democracy and unlimited democracy, where the limitation is imposed by this principle of protecting people from force. So you could vote for things on like who is going to be the president, uh, but there shouldn't be votes on things like should we be able to tax or how much tax, because when you tax, you're coercing people. Or should there be regulations? Regulations also are coercive. We can talk more about that if you want. So there shouldn't just be mob rule or unlimited majority rules. A classic example of this is Athens. So the Athenian assembly voted to kill Socrates because they didn't like him going around and allegedly corrupting the youth by having these conversations with citizens and prominent citizens and embarrassing them. And they put him to death. So you shouldn't, that which violates his freedom of speech. So there are limits to what people should be able to vote on. But if you have this principle in place, it's the principle of not initiating force against people, then it's okay to have votes on some things. Like I said, certain politicians, you could vote for their office, who's going to fill the office, or what color uniform should the police wear? That's something maybe you could vote on. Maybe seems kind of silly, but there's no issue there of coercing people. So that voting on something like that wouldn't be a problem. But you shouldn't be able to vote on whether people are coerced or not, in Rand's view.
Okay. Yeah, my ethic doesn't have a problem with aggression, really. Not per se. I don't think it's inherently immoral. I think it's a valid strategy in capitalism. But my problem with government is the democratic decision making mechanism. I think evolution gave us the idea of capitalism. I think it's a system that it selects for. I think true capitalism is, I'm sure you've probably heard some form of it where people vote with their dollars, and you can see when you create a system that bases decision making or market decision making solely based upon how productive you are. Like I like to say, right makes might. Right, the more productive you are, the more power you have, and that's where I think democracy goes wrong. It creates perverted incentives by pooling, pooling resources via taxation or voluntary or whatever. It, it doesn't matter if you once you pool resources and distribute the ability to command that capital uniformly without regard to how productive everyone was. I think that perverts incentives and makes decision making less efficient and leads eventually to a system collapse.
Okay, I made a few notes on that. So one thing you mentioned was that you're not opposed to aggression, and by that I think you mean
Per se.
coercion.
Yeah.
Or now is this the same as the initiation of force?
Yes.
Okay, so you're not opposed to initiating force against people. So that would be a very big difference between our views, and I would also say between your view and capitalism. As I understand capitalism, as Rand understands capitalism, the initiation of force is barred. That's the essential feature of capitalism, that you cannot initiate force against other people. You have to interact with them in a voluntary way. So I would say you don't advocate capitalism. I don't know what I would call it. Might makes right, maybe, or I don't
No.
know, but not capitalism. But I'm
Right.
interested in exploring this point
Yeah.
some more because I think it's very important.
Yeah, it is very important. It's actually right makes might, I believe.
That
The
okay,
so I think right is, you know, a substitute for my morality is being productive, like maximizing productivity of society. And that, of course, that makes you more productive, which gives you more power to do what you want, right? So it just because so I think that's true capitalism. Like the profit incentive, a system based purely on the profit incentive, with no democratic perversions. And that's the essence of the true market. I think libertarianism has this perverted idea of capitalism, which came from, I think, modern democracies, principles. Natural rights and this non-aggression principle. I think this is a perversion of the capitalist ethic, and I think libertarians kind of somehow stole this idea of capitalism, and that's kind of like it has if you Google like the definition of capitalism, you'll just see it's private property for the sake of profit. I think it should stick to that, and you shouldn't introduce some type of Lockean property rights, right? So I think Rand would agree with like kind of a Lockean view on property, right? Like with home, like how do you determine ownership? So that's the key, right? So in my ethic, the key is I don't care as long as it maximizes productivity, right? So if you home, so the differences between my ethic and say anarcho-capitalism is they adopt Lockean property rights for the most part, except for maybe the Lockean proviso. So they believe in homesteading, they believe in rightful transfer. I don't care. That's a sunk cost, right? You shouldn't look back to the past on what was done with a piece of capital to determine who should own it now and in the future. That should totally be a profit driven motive, right? You should look at who's going to be most effective with this property, and who determines that. It's not going to be a government. It's going to be the same thing in a market, in everything in a market. It's going to be the entrepreneurs, right? So if you do want to aggress against somebody with respect to the libertarian principles, if someone homesteaded a land, if you want to take it, if you're an entrepreneur and you think you can better utilize that and take with and also taking into account the cost of the aggression when you try to take it from them, then I think it can be moral. Just like, for instance, when we took the land from the Indians, right? Sorry, Native Americans. When we took land from the Native Americans, uh, if that didn't happen, we would have been a lot less productive, and we utilized the land much more efficiently. And I think ultimately that justifies the taking of capital with respect to the libertarian principle. So you see, my ethic is consequentialist. I don't care about the past or who owned it or Lockean property. I care about what's going to be done with that piece of capital for the good of society. And that ultimately still a market function, just as long as entrepreneurs do it. And it's not perverted by democratic incentive where resources are pooled, where people who didn't earn the money vote on how to spend it and take other people's property using those resources. That perverts the profit incentive, and what you get is you don't get profitable outcomes for society and for the good of evolution's goal ultimately.
Okay. There's a lot there, and there's a lot I could say about that.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm taking notes here. So you mentioned the good of society once or twice. That's a very different framework than mine or Rand's. So she has a individualist view or an egoist view where what's also most important is what's good for you as an individual, not what's allegedly some common good or good for society. So if my interest somehow comes into conflict with the interests of others or society at large, I should do what's best for myself, on my view. And Rand's view, that's what being an egoist means. Now, maybe there isn't a conflict. There doesn't need to be a conflict. There could be a harmony with other people. And this is part of what a capitalist society is designed so that people can be in harmonious relations with each other. That's what the principle of rights is meant to do. And we can talk more about what exactly rights means, but in essence, it's not initiating force against others. That creates conflict. Um, I Let me make a couple other points at least. Anarcho-capitalism. I think that is probably a contradiction in terms. I don't think anarchy is consistent with capitalism. Anarchy is a system in which there is no government, no state, but capitalism requires a state to protect individuals' rights. and place the use of force under objective control instead of having everyone decide for himself, take the law into his own hands and mete out private justice, a vigilante kind of system. That would be like a war of all against all, and you just have chaotic, bloody feuds among gangs, rival gangs, I suppose. Um, that's definitely not a system of freedom. Uh, in Rand's system, a capitalist system, you have a government to, if you have a dispute between people, you can't just, take a baseball bat to them or shoot them with a gun. You take them to court. You settle your disputes peacefully. That's placing the use of force under objective rules of law. But anarchy doesn't do that, whereas capitalism does do that. So I don't think there can be a system anarcho-capitalism. And maybe I'll make it one more point. Um, so you're not against the initiation. Oh, we should talk about property too, Lockean property. But let me make this before. So if you're not against the initiation of force, I'm just trying to concretize this in my mind, like with a very concrete example. So I come up to you, let's say, and I want to mug you and take your money. Now you say you're not against the initiation of force, so do you have any objection to my doing that?
Well, you're gonna have to prove that you're gonna have to prove to society that once you do rob me, that it increased productivity with you know,
Okay, so if it
as
benefits
compared to
the alleged good of society, then you're cool with
if
muggings.
if it increases productive overall productivity.
Okay, so uh, maybe we should talk about collectivism versus individualism because I think that
Yeah,
might be a more
yeah.
fundamental issue. If you don't
I had
don't
some
really think,
questions. I had some comments on what you said too. I thought, from the way you defined government, I thought it sounded like it's compatible with anarcho-capitalism. You claim it's voluntary. So, and unless you somehow think this is a natural type of monopoly, do you think government and the protection of rights should be a monopolistic service of the market? Is that what you're trying to say?
well, I think it should have a monopoly on the use of force, but initiate or not initiate retaliatory force. It's meant to stop initiated force. Um, it should have a monopoly on that, but I don't know that I would say that's a market outcome. I think that's um, I'm not sure how to describe it, but I think just thinking about it,
It's just
how
because you
should
use
government be set up? I think it should have a monopoly on retaliatory force.
it's just I think if I remember right, I think you used the word voluntary.
Yeah, it should be funded by voluntary means.
That's strange. Okay, so if I don't want to participate with your,
You don't
if
have
I
to fund it. I mean, it's up to you whether you donate. Or,
but
I
they
mean, there are other ways than donations. Like there could be lotteries. That's another method of funding the government. Rand talks in her article about paying for contracts, having contracts enforced by the government.
yeah.
That's one way. In
So
order to have your contract enforced by the state, you could pay a fee to the state. That's another way. But it would be voluntary, so you don't have to contribute. You could be like a free rider. There might be some free riders in
hmm,
society, but I don't think that would be a problem.
you don't think free riding's a problem?
Not necessarily.
Why would anyone? Well, I do think there can be market solutions to the free rider problem, just as long as the service is provided. I
I
think
mean, you
people,
could do things like you can incentivize people to contribute. Like um, you could get, I don't know what kind of maybe you could have your name put on a list, some kind of list which is publicly viewable
yeah,
if you do contribute. And if you're not on that list, people might like askance about you at you
yeah,
and say, "Hey, you're not contributing. What's going on? I'm not.
yeah.
Maybe I'm gonna less likely want to be your friend or do business with you if you're not doing anything to contribute to the government." And uh, so there could be some reputational harm to you if you don't contribute, but it's not going to come to the point where you're coerced to contribute.
Yeah, that reminds me. That's my solution to the justice system. But so one difference I have is with you is we need variation in law in order for evolution, in order for us, the market and evolution, to determine the optimal laws that maximize productivity. So I do think there should be competition in law so that we can see what works. We need experimentation. That's a evolutionary and market function. But also, I think there should be no privacy. I think the real solution to justice in a market is no privacy and a open reputation system, which is what I think money will become. So I think evolution's evolving money into reputation, and it's going to be an open reputation system where everybody has access to every piece of information that's on this blockchain. I think it's going to be have some crypto form. So you're not going to be able to hide information about yourself, no matter it's your records, your financial history, your sexual history, um, education history. I don't care. It's going to be put forth where everyone can access it, and where the market will determine like several reputational scores which you can spend as money, and your reputation will reflect your productivity, and ultimately it's your productivity towards evolution's goal. Again, everything comes to that. So yeah, so those that's my differences between like what you just said. I think there's inherently some contradictions between like having a monopoly, because I do think, well, I do think the reputations, so anybody can be a judge, anyone can be a judge in this reputation system, because you're gonna have a reputation score just on your how productive you are on adjudicating what's the truth and not. And then there's going to be like anyone can enforce, but ultimately, it's going to be just the same. It's going to utilize, it's going to free up the true market, right? It's going to, because I think privacy it's an abomination of uh, capitalism. It's something given to us again by democracy. It's something that's a perversion of the capitalist ethic. There's no reason why we should suppress information, including IP law, that should be disseminated freely. If you want to protect your IP law, then pay for the protection and see how evolution treats you. Ultimately, you have to see how profitable a venture is in order to determine its morality.
Okay. Uh, I want to ask about a couple things. First, if you're against privacy, I notice you're not showing yourself here. So, are you keeping your image in your name private? If so,
So
is that somehow contradictory to your principles or what?
no, it's not contradictory. Like I can be a hypocrite all I want. What I'm describing is true objectivism, right? I'm describing a natural force out there. I'm trying to describe to people when I talk about my ethic is what evolution. So
Objectivism? That's Ayn Rand's philosophy,
it,
or
it,
the name she gave to her. So maybe you mean something different by
an
objectivism.
objective ethic, right? A truly objective. I don't think Ayn Rand is justified in calling her ethic objective.
Have you
Describing
read Ayn Rand?
she hold on. I don't think she has an objective grounding in her foundation. Me, I ground mine
Wait.
in
Have you read Ayn Rand?
no, but
But you
I
don't think
watch a
she
lot. I
has
watch
objective
a lot.
grounding?
No, I think all she does is says she just looks out in reality and thinks life is the essence of value or the foundation of value, or I forgot what she calls it.
Do you think maybe you should look into her views and read her some before
I mean, if you know
assessing
it,
her
you
view?
can correct me if I've made a
Well,
mistake.
independent of whether I know it, if you haven't read her views, then are you in a position to evaluate them?
Did I have you? I mean, you can
No,
correct
that's not the
me.
issue. The issue is you've made a claim.
Yeah,
You said she doesn't have grounding for saying her view is objective,
yeah.
but to
So do
make
you
that
want to?
claim,
Yeah,
then you would have to have read her views or at least heard her speak or something.
yeah. I've watched a lot of the videos.
Okay, so based on
I
your
haven't read her direct literature, but I read a lot of the lexicon. You know, I've watched a lot of the videos.
okay, so
If
you've
I've made a
seen
mistake, you can correct me. You can show me where my interpretation was wrong, or directly quote where I'm wrong
Okay,
instead of
well,
just saying, I don't know.
maybe we can get into that some.
Yeah. But so let me show you the difference. I think I can claim objectivism because I'm describing a positive explanation on what morality is. I'm describing what evolution selects for, and I think it can be shown using evolutionary game theory through using evolutionary stable strategy, right? So that's what makes it objective. I'm describing a convergence that you'll see in the future. I don't think I correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Ayn Rand has any objective grounding. Like she may claim logic, but what is she referencing? What makes it objective?
Well, we can talk about that.
Yeah.
Um, I wonder if we should go straight to that, or if we should talk about egoism some. I'm kind of interested in talking about egoism
Yeah.
first,
Sure.
and then maybe we can get into the issue of objectivity
Yeah.
and whether Rand has grounds for claiming objectivity for her system. So it seems like you're opposed to egoism, and I'm curious why. Like, can you give me reasons why I should do something that's not good for myself? Because it seems like that's what a anti-egoist view would involve. I'm doing something that's not best for myself, and why should I ever do that?
Um. So in game theory, they have something called Homo economicus, and they've shown that it's not evolutionarily stable, right? Like you can see in nature, like individuals can sacrifice themselves for the group, and evolution rewards that for their genes at least, right? So there's self-interest, which is very superficial. I mean, it kind of looks attractive to, the libertarian or something, but if you really look at it, it doesn't make any sense. We're mortal, right? I can come up with hypotheticals, trolley car scenarios, utilitarian scenarios, where egoism, if you define it as, just your bodily self-interest, I think in that respect it's irrational, because you can make a case that genetic self-interest is even a better explanation, an evolutionary explanation of what's moral. And I think there's even something higher than that. I think since you're mortal, I don't think it makes sense to strive to maximize your happiness or your lifespan, or I don't know, your what even your well-being. I think there are cases when you should sacrifice yourself for the again, my only principle is the goal of evolution. I
Well, what
don't
do I
think
care about evolution? Why should I care about it?
because
If there is some like evolutionary goal that's where it seems like one thing you're doing is you're personifying evolution in a way. Like it's this thing that has its goals of its own, like it's another organism. I'm not sure that's the right way to think about evolution. But if it is, even if it is some other organism, if its goals come into conflict with mine, why shouldn't I prioritize my own?
because you can try to fight the natural selection process, but that won't go well for you.
Well, okay, well, it's
It's
not
the
going to go
most
well for me, but
yeah.
then you're appealing to my interest as a grounds to why I should do such and such.
It
So in the end, it seems like you are appealing to an egoistic
it's
reason. Like it's bad for me if I don't do such and such, and therefore I should do such and such.
no, but there are cases when this ethic will tell you you have to sacrifice yourself
And why should I ever do that if it doesn't somehow benefit me?
because it benefit. First off, you can make a case that, on a on one level higher than self-interest, you should sacrifice yourself for your genes.
Why do I care about my genes?
I mean, why do you care about anything at all? Have you ever asked yourself about that? Your all your ultimate desires are programmed into you by evolution.
Well, I don't know
All your
about that.
you kind of
Um,
just think about some of your most ultimate desires. You're gonna come to a point where you don't know why you desire it. That
really?
that is evolutionary program. Yeah, you can keep asking why. In other words, okay,
Well,
why are you
let's
working
say my
at it?
ultimate goal is happiness.
You don't know why you desire happiness is
No,
justified.
I would say because it feels great.
Yeah. Do you know why
End of
you want to?
story.
Why is feeling great good?
Isn't it kind of self-evident?
No. Well, it is to me. It's evolutionary programming. It is to evolutionary scientists. It's evolutionary programming. Why? It's incentivizing you to fulfill its goal. So see how I have an objective explanation. This is where Ayn Rand cannot cross the objective barrier. You're going to have trouble explaining your ultimate desires, which are programmed into you by. So do you deny that your ultimate desires are programmed into you? This is why plants lean into the sun. This is why roots grow toward water. This is why moss can solve problems trying to find nutrients through the air or something like that. These are all every action that's complicated. These are evolutionary mechanisms, and it's not done programming. It's put in a partial program into you. And until you are perfectly aligned with the natural selection process, it isn't done yet. That's what we're trying to discover. We're trying to deduce what it's making us convert all our moralities converge to. What I'm describing is a positive convergence. What is this convergence that all these moralities are forced to converge to through the natural selection process? Because game theory teaches you evolution selects for strategy. This is why morality should be in the realm of evolutionary game theory. Every strategy you select to use a means towards some ends that may be a means to another end. All of this is game theory.
I think I'm trying to tie this back to egoism because I don't see I still don't see why I should place something above my own happiness or my own interests.
So I can create like an extreme hypothetical, right? Where you could somehow, like, I'll construct a hypothetical where you can extend your life for one more second, but at the cost of the rest of humanity. Now, intuitively, do you think this is right or wrong? Because egoism says you should extend your life for that 1 second at the cost
Not
of the rest of
necessarily.
humanity.
I mean, if it maximizes my own happiness,
Yep.
yes,
Yeah.
but I don't know that
So,
extending my life for 1 second is gonna, at the cost, if that's gonna cause the rest of humanity to go out of existence, I'm not sure that it would, in fact, maximize my happiness to extend my life by 1 second. But
yeah.
if we
So let's say
stipulate
I could
that it
hook you
would,
up to a machine that would not only you would experience euphoria, but you would experience the illusion that the rest of humanity would survive, right? So you're under this machine hooking you up would extend your life for 1 second, make you euphoric, so you're total ecstasy, and you believe, and it'll fool you into believing the rest of humanity will survive. So this is totally in your egoist self interest now, but you objectively know that this is just an illusion. Everyone will die after this. Your life will be extended. Your happiness, there's I've tried to close the, I've tried to close up all the holes, but this proves that this this temporary increase in happiness isn't worth the death of the rest of humanity. This just is what, and this is just one example of where the limits of egoism, the limits of rationality using
I'm not
egoism.
following the example, the thought experiment. You said I'm hooked up to something and then I have an illusion.
A happiness machine. Let's just call it a happiness machine. It
Okay.
it increases your life by 1 second, and it maximizes the happiness you feel over that 1 second at the cost of the rest of humanity. So now humanity, objectively, like with outside of this thought experiment, just me and you talking outside of your body, right? The rest, humanity will go extinct. Evolution will have to start again somehow and try to get to its goal through another means. Maybe not through humans, but now intuitively, do you think this is wrong or right? When you choose this happiness machine to extend your life for 1 second in sheer ecstasy and sheer happiness at the cost of the rest of humanity, intuitively, is that wrong or right? Just intuitively. I'm not
I'm
asking.
not sure.
I'm not
I'm not
asking you to
sure.
apply objectivism. Just your evolutionary intuition.
I'm not sure. I'm still trying to understand the example. Like I don't know if I'm understanding it as you're intending it to be understood. So I mean, it sounds like am hooked up to this happiness machine, and by hooking myself up, it gives me a great experience of happiness for 1 second.
One more second than you would have if you didn't hook yourself up. So it maximizes
And,
happiness if you were to hook up to this machine, but at the
and
cost of the
I,
rest of humanity.
yeah, I don't know if like does that mean like my
Even an hour, you can make it an hour, you can make it a year. It doesn't matter.
what
Intelligent
about
life will cease to exist
the
until evolution can, build it up again.
yeah, I don't I mean is my happiness maximized for my whole life or just that 1 second or 1 hour or 1 year?
No, you can either choose. You're about to die, right?
So,
You're mortal. You're at the limit of your natural lifespan, but this machine is there
yeah.
as an option now. So your only two choices are not to hook it up to it or hook up to it. At,
Yeah.
at this point, you're about to die. Like once you make your decision,
Now I'm thinking,
unless you
do
hook
I
it up.
have any kids that I care about and
That
who I would
by
want to
strict
have, like who it
egoism,
would make me feel good? But it can make me feel good if other people's lives go well, if these people matter to me.
yeah,
So egoism doesn't mean you don't care about others and you're just indifferent to their interests.
that is
Relationships are very
you.
important
I
to
thought
an
you just
egoist.
said like if anything conflicts with your interests, right? And this machine will
Yeah,
fool
but they
you.
matter. Other people are part of my interests. So my friends, my loved ones, if things go badly for them, then it affects me. It makes me feel bad if their life is not going well because they matter to me. They're my egoistic values, part of my life.
It like so it so in other words, it doesn't matter. Like if you look at it objectively, evolution, the natural selection force, the evolutionary selection force will choose the one more in line with its ethic. This is undeniable, right? There's a preference every time evolution selects. In order to select, it must have a preference, and you can deduce these preferences. Like evolutionary game theory has already partially solved morality, right? It can predict in a certain environment what you can expect to see. It can describe what evolution is selecting for in a certain environment. Now, what my ethic will do is extend evolutionary game theory back to economics, incorporate what's called general evolution, right? Which is an evolutionary force that extends beyond the biosphere. And once you do this, you can now look at any environment as its own being. Like you're not restricted by analyzing evolutionary selection forces on biology. You're also looking at how each biological being and non-biological being combine with each other to form another being, like an environment or an ecosystem, and how that's evolutionarily stable over time.
Okay, so
And
I just want to highlight for anyone listening to this, in case there's any confusion. So you have a very broad conception of evolution. It's not just the Darwinian idea that species evolve according to natural selection. You have a more, I think you called it universal evolution at one point, where evolution is not just the biological thing, it applies beyond the biological realm.
yeah, so I did.
That's right.
I independently discovered it. From like looking at like books at like the meme machine, just getting ideas from that. But I mean, it's been discovered long ago. I think a lot of circles call it universal Darwinism. I didn't
Universal
know that. Yeah,
Darwinism.
but that's an alternative title. But I I I immediately called it general evolution just because I thought it was like I kind of got inspired from general relativity. I thought it's analogous to that. You have special relativity that applies to certain conditions, which is analogous to the biosphere in this case. And now it's easy to it's almost undeniable. It's really almost unrefutable that we see other things evolving, even though it's from our choices like technology. Evolution doesn't care about what survives a particular event, right? It doesn't care if it's a biological mechanism or an artificial one. So general evolution will help to explain the evolution of AI, technology, business strategies, morality, even because morality is handed down through non-genetic means. We can teach ourselves through books, and these things need a broader evolutionary explanatory analysis structure, right? Methodologies. And I think this general evolutionary game theory will be the ultimate explanation for morality. And it puts humanity into perspective. It puts your ego, it puts altruism, it puts all that stuff in morality in its proper perspective with respect to evolution. Because I think everything was programmed into for evolution's goal. We need to understand what it's forcing us to toward.
Okay.
It's an actual God that punishes and rewards. This is what makes it objective.
Okay. God. Okay, that's
I you know
um
and Jay, you levied the accusation that I'm personifying. I'm not personifying. Just because I see a mechanism that's forcing us to converge, and it you can have a mechanistic process that's not conscious that selects. I don't know who programmed it. I don't venture out to say who programmed it, but it's obvious. There's already theory of evolution. There's this thing that has selection patterns, and these patterns can be deduced through math, through game theory. And this is why I think this is why I don't value philosophy. They just totally not they're totally not caught up with these revolutions in human behavioral sciences.
okay. There's a lot here.
Yeah.
Um so you said you don't value philosophy. There are many philosophies I don't value, but there are also some that I do. I think philosophy is a discipline with many different approaches, and I think many of them have many problems, but I wouldn't throw out the entire field. I think if you approach it in a certain way, it can be very valuable. In particular, I think Ayn Rand's philosophy is valuable, but I guess debating that is part of what we're here to do. Um, I am interested in going back to the egoism issue. I still don't see any reason why I should place anything above my own interests. And we started to get into some examples of that maybe were surprising to you. Like when I said it's egoistic for me to take into consideration other people's interests, like a friend's or a spouse, for example, and how they're doing can affect my own well-being.
So
Um,
what I kind of meant to say is that it doesn't matter what you choose, right? There's only one. There's the the stable strategy. What you value is there's only one unique stable strategy, right? You may value this and you may value that. That's subjective. Evolution doesn't care. The more you deviate from the optimal, the optimal, the
evolution
optimal.
doesn't care,
What's that?
but you said evolution doesn't
Yeah,
care.
the selection process doesn't care. It's a mechanism, right? So it has a
Okay.
goal. It'll mac
But I
it,
have goals and I care
it
about certain
but if your
things.
goals conflict with evolutions, you'll experience a negative selection pressure, and it's
Well,
proportional to
so
how
it's
far you
so it's
deviate.
harming me if I
Yeah.
go against some evolutionary
Yes.
process.
Yeah.
But then the egoistic thing for me to do would be to align myself with that evolutionary process.
Yeah.
But I'm still going to be doing something
But
which is best for me.
you don't know the optim. You don't necessarily know. You're already using a non-optimal methodology, which is philosophy and objectivism, instead of using evolutionary or extending evolutionary game theory, or even just regular game theory. You're not even you're ignoring game theory altogether. Like
Well, I
that's
don't know
that.
much about game theory,
Yeah.
so
Have you watched Beautiful Mind?
I've heard about prisoners' dilemmas, but I haven't looked into them much.
Have you?
I think I saw that movie that came out many years ago, right?
Yeah, it's kind of old.
Yeah, I don't
Behind.
remember it at all,
Yeah,
hardly.
that's the
Russell
guy.
Crowe, was he the?
Yeah, Russell Crowe. That's the guy. That's the guy who made the critical piece that unlocks all of my ethic, which is Nash equilibrium. There's a bar scene you can probably after the interview just go beautiful mind bar scene, and that is the bare essence of morality. It's called Nash equilibrium, where rational actors don't want to deviate from a certain strategy set for the group of actors. Ultimately, evolutionary game theory did is apply natural selection to that concept, and it came up with evolutionary stable strategy, where you don't need consciousness, and it shows the preference of evolution without respect to anyone's consciousness. You don't need. That's how plants evolve certain mechanistic behaviors. This is why you have mechanistic desires. This is so we all don't know the optimal way. Like some of us may be closer to optimality than others. Like I may be using a more optimal methodology like game theory than you, right? I mean, all
I'm
else
curious
equal.
about something.
I'll
Um,
yeah.
do, do you believe in free will?
Uh, that's something almost kind of irrelevant at the moment. It's
Because it seems like when you talk about you've talked about like mechanistic desires, and it's making me think of a determinist view where
yeah,
you've used the term like we have these desires that are just programmed into us.
yeah.
I think there's a way in which we actually choose our desires, not directly, but in an indirect kind of way. But talking about human beings being programmed or acting in a mechanistic way made me think maybe you have a deterministic view. But whether human beings are determined or free, I think is a very fundamental um, question, which is going to affect all kinds of things about morality. I think even whether there is such a thing of morality is going to turn on that question. I don't think there can actually be morality without free will. So if you
I
do
don't think
think,
it's too relevant. I think you can have the quote unquote illusion of choice within a deterministic system.
but
Either
can you
way, I
have
mean, I don't think
morality if you're determined?
what's that? Yeah,
Okay, that I don't agree with that,
there's
and
like I
maybe we
think
can
it's
talk
called
about that. But
I think it's called the compatibilist view. I don't really
okay, yeah,
study
I reject
philosophy, but
compatibilism.
yeah, but I think
So
you
for
could
anyone who
you
doesn't know, compatibilism is the idea that free will is compatible with determinism. And also, there's different flavors of it or different aspects of it. It's also the view that moral responsibility is compatible with determinism. And determinism is the idea that there are no alternative possibilities. There's only one path into the future. You might have this illusion of choice where you can go in direction A or direction non-A or direction B, you might call it. But it is just an illusion according to the determinist view. Um, on the determinist view, everything you do is necessitated by antecedent factors. There really is no choice. But I think morality is it's a guide to how you should choose. What is the good kind of choice to make? Should you be honest or dishonest? Should you initiate force against people or not? Should you use your mind and think or not think? But if all that is an illusion, if there really is no alternative possibility, then I don't think it makes sense to say you should do something rather than something else.
I
Um,
don't I don't think
but the compatibilists will say, yeah, you actually can,
yeah.
despite uh, you can make moral. Uh, it is right to say you should do such and such, even though you couldn't have done otherwise, and that just makes no sense to me. But I
I
know a
don't
lot of people hold that view.
I think you can say as a
Philosophers,
compatibilist.
at least, academic philosophers.
I think you can say, and just because I'm a compatibilist doesn't mean I'm necessarily a determinist, right? But I don't think morality becomes useless unless you're omniscient, right? Unless so, if everything is determined, even if it is everything is determined, assume everything is we live in a deterministic universe. Morality still applies because as long as you don't know the future with 100% certainty, it still applies to us from our perspective.
But what is morality? If it's the field that tells
It's
you how you should act,
it's a tool given to us by evolution in order to align our actions with evolution's goal.
but I'm
That's
going to align. How can I align or not align? I'm just going to do whatever I'm programmed to do.
Yeah, and you'll
So there's
experience natural you'll experience selection pressures based upon your action, just like if a god
okay.
were alive. I mean, in existence, like if the Christian God were. So what makes the Christian ethic or morality objective is that there's a God there that's punishing your actions based upon its rules. It's the same for evolution. I'm not trying to deify it or not, but it is some type of mechanism. And not it may be the most fundamental force of the universe. I think it may actually potentially be a unifying force and theory ultimately if it's the unifying force, because I think it may determine even physical laws. Evolution is that ubiquitous. But
Hmm.
that aside, I mean, I don't think free will is really, I studied probability a lot. I studied randomness. We study randomness, not in the physical, not in the physics sense. I didn't study much quantum mechanics, but randomness is usually a symptom of just not knowing all the variables. And then we introduce, it kind of represents uncertainty from a non-omniscient point of view. That's what kind of probability uncertainty is. So I don't necessarily think morality is nullified when you have determinism. But I don't necessarily, I'm not necessarily a determinist, although you know, as someone who leans towards science, I like to believe it's deterministic. But even then, even if there's like some quantum randomness, I don't think that even makes a difference. You can still act based upon probability distributions. You can still incorporate what's called objective probability distributions in your decision making process. You can still optimize decision making without using your emotion or your subjective preferences. But let's just
Okay.
put free will aside.
Um,
I think we should put that aside because I think that goes beyond. It goes into like arguments in physics and stuff and quantum randomness and stuff, and if things are really determined. But it does look like, and just from the evidence, that randomness is kind of going away. It's kind of hiding itself in the corner, just like religion is.
okay. I'm not sure what the best direction is to go from here.
Let's go back to
Here's,
capitalism, maybe.
uh, I guess here's where I have to make a choice if I actually have free will, what to do next. Um,
Might be just an illusion. You might be determined. You just
well,
don't know.
that's what determinists will often say.
Like it only becomes a problem if you know what you have to do, what you're determined to do. That's the time when it becomes that free will becomes a problem and morality becomes a problem. If you know you're doomed to do something, but you don't, you're working under an uncertain perspective. So morality still applies. Just that's as long as you have uncertainty, morality will still apply. I've never tried to paraphrase it, but I think that's somewhat of a way to sum it up. As long as you're uncertain, morality can still apply. You still need to try to
Mm,
align yourself with evolution, and evolution will hold you accountable. I don't mean, and I'm not trying to make it again. I'm not trying to make it a god or anything. I'm not trying to make it a human with a mind. I'm looking at it. I know there's at least a mechanical process out there, and it forces us to try. That's what evolution gave us morality for. To in
Well,
order, that's the sole purpose of morality, the evolutionary purpose, to align our actions with its natural selection process. It's trying to make.
maybe we should go back to the egoism again. So I still don't see why I should do something that is not best for myself. And if taking evolution into account is best for myself, then I'll do it. But the reason I'm doing it is because it's best for myself. And since that's the reason I'm doing it, it's an egoistic view. Or it's
But there is an objective. There is an objective optimal action you should take, and this evolutionary pressure will manifest itself in other people aggressing against you if you do not perfectly align yourself with it. It can manifest itself with other people's aggression against you. For instance, for whatever reason, you might have a subjective preference to own a piece of land. But if this land can somehow be better utilized by someone else to justify someone aggressing against you, right? You will experience, there will be a natural tendency for society to aggress against you. Evolution will try to communicate to the rest of society to take it from you if you don't want to give it up voluntarily. This is what evolution gave us capitalism for. The profit incentive is an evolutionary signal. It is the invisible hand. It's not self-interest.
Hold on, hold on. Maybe we should try an island scenario, and because I think sometimes
Yeah.
it's useful for isolating certain issues. So let's say that two people are on an island, and maybe they're castaways, like Robinson Crusoe,
Yeah.
and they wash up on this island, and now
Before
they have to
before
figure
you
out.
finish off that hypothetical, let me just give the my exact definition of capitalism. So it puts the you could better construct the hypothetical. So my definition of capitalism is the realization that we are just capital. We are just capital. You know what a capital good is in economics? It's just a production good. Our only the
Yeah.
our true value, each of our value, everything's value is just its ability to produce this perfect evolutionary being for evolution, which is its goal. So we are just a means to that end. So that's where the natural
Okay.
selection process. So that's what the natural selection process is going to do on this island for whatever hypothetical you can construct. It's going to force
Okay.
us to produce this perfect evolutionary being. We have to find out what its features are and how to build it, and as quick as possible. And that's what the selection.
But I care about my own ends. I don't care
It
about
doesn't
what
matter
it's.
what you. It doesn't matter what you care about. Is it? It
Why?
really?
Why not?
You can deviate. Like anyone's free to deviate, but you're not going to be free from the selection processes that come with that. You're not going to be free from the evolutionary consequences that evolution imposes upon you. I'm not saying you should
I
do
mean,
any.
I do think there is such a thing as evolution.
Yeah.
I agree with Darwin's theory, but you don't mean Darwin's theory. You mean something else because
I mean
you're
a
talking
general form
about
of that.
this.
It's
Yeah.
it's an extension
I
of
so
that though.
I'm not ready to sign on to that form
Yeah.
of evolution.
General evolution or
So I
universal.
guess
Go ahead with the Crusoe experiment.
okay. I guess I'll maybe we'll come back to that line of thought about
Yeah, yeah, but try to put it into perspective. You can. I'm trying to give you the. I'm trying to give you the definition that's so that you can actually predict what I'll say about this island. So I'm gonna say that the selection force is gonna provide incentives for you to align with that goal to create a being that can perfectly exist. Right? It has the ability, the knowledge and
so you
ability
think the evolution as you understand it, it's trying to
to create a
it sounds like
yeah.
okay, so you have this idea of a perfect being
Yes,
that and that is
like a Jesus.
I, I don't know if that's projecting a consciousness onto evolution
No,
in this broad sense.
this can be
Like it's
derived
got
using
this.
game theory through what's called again evolutionary stable strategy. I think it's going to have a general form. So if you look at evolutionary stable strategy, you can look at any environment and predict what things can perpetuate themselves in that environment. So general evolution will remove their environments, look at every environment as its own being, and see what better can survive. And ultimately, that's going to be the perfect evolutionary being, because there's a time limit to the universe, right? Physics has already proven that there's the entropic death that's coming in the universe. I think evolution is one of its goals is to solve that time limit to create a
Well,
being.
there's the way I think of the universe, it's eternal, it's out of time. Time doesn't apply to it. It's in the universe. By the universe, I mean everything that exists. So
Yeah,
existence doesn't ever go out of existence. It doesn't become nothing.
sorry. Let me reword that. What I meant was that's going to go out of existence is usable energy. So the universe may exist, but the ability to use energy to act is going to disappear, I guess. I don't know. I don't know any other word for it. I'm not used to talking about it. But you know what entropy is, like the second
Yeah,
law.
that's the word that was coming to mind.
Yeah. So
Entropy.
that's like a universal time limit on how to utilize on complex beings that can utilize action, right? That's what in order to act, we need to utilize energy. And that utilizable energy is decreasing as time goes on to zero. That's ultimately where we're headed. So there's going to be no ability to act.
Utilizable energy is decreasing as
Yes.
time goes on.
Yeah, the heat death. They call it the heat death. Heat is like has a different term in physics. This is just from my, I'm not a physics major, but I did study, engineering level physics, but the heat's just kind of like it's needed to it's the transfer of energy. It's needed to do work in
Yeah,
order to
I've heard this idea that I've heard the phrase heat death and the idea that entropy is always increasing,
yeah.
but I guess it could decrease in a local way. Um,
Yeah.
like
Not without a closed
if
system, yeah, an open system, yeah, you could have a decrease in entropy.
okay, so but anyway, uh, so
But anyways,
I'm trying to connect that back to what we were talking about,
were
the
we
idea
doing
that there's this general evolution. Um, you had mentioned there's this perfect being,
yeah.
and you think that the universe is
Well, evolute that's its goal.
unconsciously trying to create this perfect being.
Yeah. So I don't want to get into like maybe
And what
my
is the perfect being? Like, how do you, by
this,
what standard is it perfect?
it can
What
act
makes
in
it
it can act in ways that perpetuates itself.
that keeps it itself in existence?
Yeah.
So there might be, I guess, organisms like a bird or a worm or a human being. They have different levels of ability at keeping themselves in existence.
Yeah.
And maybe in a million or billion or trillion years, some other kind of being will evolve, which is even better at
Yeah.
keeping itself in existence.
Yep. But you don't necessarily value that higher species for its own sake. There's still a means to that perfect being. You don't worship anything short of perfection. You always want to improve. That's what evolution forces us to do. That's why it
Why
gave
wouldn't
us
that be biological evolution though?
no. That's a subset of general evolution, so it explains that too.
But why would it be
What do you mean?
why isn't it just the same old regular evolution? I mean, it's just another species, right, that might come into being in a trillion years. But why not think of that as just regular biological Darwinian evolution?
Because things evolved not using biological mechanisms, and biological evolution is way too slow.
What,
It's
so
just
what is the other mechanism that it would be using?
it's a higher form of so evolution roughly. I'm not a biologist, but evolution gave us random mutation and natural selection. That's kind of like the slowest, most basic form of evolution, where things randomly come about and evolution selects. Then you have, then it gave us sexual selection and natural selection. So now it gave us instincts on being attracted to things, attracted to certain genetic characteristics, and that's how we find mates in order to hopefully improve upon our genetic code. That's what we do when we mate. We try to improve our genetic code so that our offspring's better than us. That's and now evolution has evolved. The evolutionary process itself has evolved. Now we have artificial selection where we can reason out. This is why evolution gave us reason in order to understand what evolution selects for, what works. We reason out what works in reality. Like we find better technologies, faster, more efficient on how to understand evolution, the physical laws around us, in order to navigate our environment. right? And all these strategies, all these technologies, all these material technologies, how we build things, all this will become part of this perfect evolutionary being. All our strategies and technologies will be part of the knowledge base of this perfect evolutionary being. So like Rand, I think uh, discovering an idea that will become part of the perfect evolutionary being is some of the most moral things you can do in life. Being that productive, finding out how what this perfect evolutionary being, finding out some of its strategy it'll implement. That's some of those most moral things you can do in life. And you
Finding
can,
out how to bring this perfect being into existence.
yeah. So again, you're gonna have to find out, its strategy set. It's gonna have.
Yeah, that seems like it's
That's what we're unconsciously doing when we improve upon our technology.
that seems like a very non-egoist perspective, and I guess
Yeah,
that's your perspective. So it
it's
would be
no, it's
non-egoist.
not
Like
my
I don't care
perspective.
about this perfect being allegedly that's gonna exist in it, or maybe it will exist. In a trillion years or whatever, there can be some being that's better than human beings are at
Your
surviving, but I don't care about that.
your
Like a
emotion.
bird, I don't think a bird should care about
It
me.
doesn't it doesn't matter what you think you believe in, right? So your ultimate desires again are a reflection of a partial programming toward this, right? It's already in partially aligned with to it. It you have you have an innate desire to be productive. Even this is kind of
No,
in
I wouldn't say that.
this is
I
kind of in
mean,
concert
I
with
think a lot of
objectivism.
people are not productive. So here's where the determinism is coming back in, that you have this innate desire to be productive. I mean, what about somebody who just wants to sit around and loaf and or maybe live off welfare checks, um, live off his parents, be a moocher? I don't think desires are
Like I said,
innate.
these are it's unfinished programming. So this is going to be it's still working on converging, perfecting your programming, right? So you're going to have
My
malfunctions,
programming.
especially as technology like changes more rapidly than biology can evolve, right? For instance, we haven't evolved yet to overcome our desires to eat sugars and refined sugars, right? But ultimately, we should, unless we go extinct and something else comes about, right? It really doesn't matter what you desire. What I'm trying to describe is what evolution's selecting for. So force you to it's going to force your future genetic line toward its goal. Like it's going to better perfect what your genetic line desires.
Well, I might not have a genetic line. I might be the end of my genetic line.
That's the
Like
beauty of general evolution. You can pass
I
down your ideas. These can be your children. The Since this perfect evolutionary being is probably not going to be human or biological, your genetic line is really
well, what do we
irrelevant.
mean by biological? Because if something is being
I mean the
if
transmission of
something is being
its.
selected for so that it's better able to keep itself in existence, that sounds like a living being. Rand has this phrase which he uses to characterize life, which is self-sustaining, self-generated action. And it sounds like you're describing something which is better able to do that kind of self-sustaining, self-generated action. And that's what this perfect being is, something which is maximally good, as good as you can be, metaphysically as good as you can be at doing this self-sustaining process. But it seems like that would just be a very good, amazing kind of living being. Why in because it's
It doesn't
living being,
necessarily
I
have
would think it's biological.
it doesn't necessarily have to have a conscience either. I don't know what I
Well,
don't know.
it doesn't have to have consciousness. Like you can have species like plants, they don't have consciousness, but
Yeah.
they are living beings. They're self-sustaining sorts of entities which can go out of existence. They face this alternative of life or death, and they're
Yeah, I mean,
biological.
you can you can try to reconcile objectivism with mine, but I don't see the point. I think you should just toss it all away, toss all of philosophy away, what's left of philosophy, and just
Well,
I don't
um,
And what's
I don't
optimal is not
there
up to us ultimately.
okay. There are certain things which I don't think you can escape. Like, can you really throw all of philosophy out? Well, what do you mean by all of philosophy? Like,
What's
does philosophy include something like the law of identity? Is that a philosophical axiom? It
what's
is, according to
what's
Aristotle and Ayn Rand. A is A. Things are what they are. Can you just throw that out?
You can throw out what's left of philosophy. So everything that hasn't grown into its own discipline yet. So, if it isn't an axiom in mathematics or, a principle or law in science or economics or all these developed disciplines that came out of philosophy, you can throw away everything else, all the thing that's left because it only confuses people like this is-odd gap. Everything I see they're just arguing with people about religion. you know it's time to move
Well,
on.
A is A, or the law of identity. I would say that's part of philosophy, part of metaphysics, the basic
I
nature
think that's
of.
part of math also. I forgot the
Well, I think
axiom.
it's part of everything in a way. I mean, I think knowledge is a unified whole, and
Yeah.
we can carve it up conceptually. We can, in our minds, we can think
But you
it's
guys don't
got
even
this or
I
that
mean,
branch.
you guys don't even utilize real logic. I mean, so the laws of logic are already in math. So I'm not throwing that part away. Everything that's hasn't isn't part of already developed discipline, like science, math, and economics, mainly those three. Everything else that's philosophy, like the morality analysis that's there, all of the way it improperly uses. Doesn't I mean, how can you can't even apply logic without rigorous definition like math does. Like this is why philosophy hasn't made any contributions for the last 2000 years. There's nothing that's come out of pure philosophy that's made an actual contribution, and especially it can be considered a bad when you consider all the resources that went into it, all the people we
Well,
pay to teach
I think it,
philosophy.
it depends on what we mean by philosophy. So I take philosophy to include logic, and that's and fundamental to logic are the law of identity, law of excluded middle. Thing is either A or non-A. And then the law of non-contradiction. A thing can't be both A and non-A at the same time in the same respect. And these logical axioms are fundamental to all knowledge, whether it's economics, physics,
Math
mathematics.
math already has better
Well, when you
axioms.
say it already has, I mean it's I mean it's is there like some temporal priority, like it had it before philosophy? I mean, was is there I mean there was the Pythagoreans. He was one of the early mathematicians,
No, logic
Pythagoras.
is a branch of math. Like I mean just your naive.
Logic is a branch of math.
Yeah. So for instance,
Well,
your
is it a branch of philosophy, or does it
it's
does
grown in.
math presuppose logic?
No, it is. It's a branch of math. It's a fundamental part of math.
Well, I'm not sure I would agree that it's a branch of math. I mean, there are like I know Bertrand Russell came up
Yeah.
with what's
Yeah.
called symbolic logic, which I don't really have a good opinion of. Um, there's also and he did well, I won't say more about Russell now, but Aristotle also, he's the father of logic. He's often called that. And I don't know that he had much to say about mathematics, Aristotle.
Math isn't just
Um,
numbers. Mathematics is about logical structures.
okay, but if you say like logic is a branch of math, it sounds like it's a subset of math. And maybe in a way it is, but it's also a, you could say, I would say it's a branch of philosophy, part of epistemology.
Yeah. So again,
But
I'm gonna throw everything of philosophy that hasn't been grown out of philosophy into a more developed discipline. Like, so if it's already in math, like it's worth keeping. Like the axioms of all the branches of math, set theory, logic, discrete math,
Well, how about something
probability.
like, well, let's go super fundamental. So the first axiom for objectivism is existence exists. Now, is that, I wouldn't say that's part of math. I would say that's part of metaphysics, or more broadly, as part of
I think
philosophy.
I think science adopts that as an axiom.
Well, I think science presupposes that.
Yep,
It's
that's fine.
it depends on that, but I wouldn't say it's part of I think it's more part of philosophy than it is part of science. Like I would say science depends on philosophy, at least that part of philosophy. It depends on a certain metaphysical view of the world. Like another thing would be cause and effect. Science would presuppose that there is cause effect rather than set out to prove that there is.
Yeah. Yeah, these are adopted by. Implicitly, we're assuming that existence is a necessary condition to make an argument. That's I think that's what existence exists
Yeah.
implicitly. That's
Well,
a
it's a precondition of anything else.
Yeah,
I mean,
and the fact
something
that
that
with respect to you're making an argument when you're saying existence exists, though you're making a statement at least.
it's a statement. It's not an
Yeah, it's a
argument.
statement. Yeah, you're making a statement.
Yes.
So in order to make yeah, we're presupposing that the existence is a necessary condition to make a statement. Okay, that's kind of like within. This is all. This is that's a fine assumption of that's a fine axiom to build off of, and I think science adopts that. They don't dispute that. I don't think so. Everything that's adopted by science and everything else is fine to keep, but everything that hasn't, we should just throw it away. Concentrate our efforts on developing game theory because it's already partially solved morality. Like if we focused, if we used all the brain power, there's a lot of smart people in philosophy. I think because I have a theory. I don't want to branch off too. I think I have an evolutionary compensation theory, or what I call a parasitic effect. I think there's a lot of selection pressures on philosophy to go extinct. So, but the people that did survive are the strongest ones. So there's a lot of smart people in philosophy, even though it's going extinct, because only the strongest ones can validate their existence by getting a tenure position or something, because they can't get a job in the in the real world. But it just goes to show
Hmm.
you don't see philosophy in the private sector, do you? Much. It's you
Well,
don't see.
professional
Yeah,
philosophy.
that goes to show the true value. That's evidence to show that what's left of philosophy is not valuable anymore. It's all government subsidized. They can only find public positions in universities. They're not useful in the real world. They're spending money and they're producing nothing. They're a detriment to production of society. Now, do I have the resources to kill them all? No. It's first off, there's laws that everyone believes in that'll thing. I want to maximize productivity, and egoism is somewhat in line with that. So it kind of looks like the right solution, but it's not perfect. And that small deviation, even though it seems like a rational moral choice, will still lead you to extinction ultimately. It's not a stable ethic, is what I'm saying. And this is
Egoism is not a stable ethic.
it's already shown. They've
You're
already
because
shown that.
it leads to extinction.
Yeah, the
See, I don't
strategy,
really of like of extinction of what?
the strategy itself, that ethic itself.
Okay.
Like if you try to indoctrinate someone into becoming an egoist, ultimately that will die out, right? The
If
strategy
I
itself,
indoctrinate someone into becoming an egoist,
the strategy
then
will die. I don't mean the person you indoctrinate. Ultimately, over time, it cannot perpetuate itself. It won't be part of the perfect evolutionary being. It you got to look at evolutionary stable strategy. It's you can watch quick videos. It's a simple concept. It's something that cannot be displaced, and something that can be continually perpetuated. Like in terms of an environment and normal evolutionary biology, game theory, but I'm extending to general evolutionary game theory, where there is no local environment. We don't classify things in local environments. We look at everything as interacting with each other. We see if an environment's stable, how you interact with your environment to make it stable. the relationship between you and your environment or other things in your environment to make each other stable. In general evolution, what makes a being is not physical bonds. A relationship between two people can create a new being, right? You can have a complementary relationship between two people, like a synergistic relationship. So you can look at society, and under general evolution, you can look at societies as its own being, right? Where each one of us is an organ performing a specialized function. So even though our goal is the same, our collective goal, which is to produce a perfect evolutionary being, based upon your abilities, the way to
It's
achieve
not
that
my
may be
goal.
different from
It's
it
not my
doesn't matter.
goal to produce.
You're already almost egoism is already kind of almost in line with it. It's not a mistake. It's already like 80% almost in line with the goal I'm describing. Now, evolution will continue to perfect that programming through the selection.
If I'm helping to produce this perfect being, it's not my intention. It's like a accidental byproduct.
Doesn't matter. Evolution's
It
consequentialist.
doesn't matter to, I mean, maybe, yeah. So maybe I am accidentally helping to produce a more a being
that
that's more capable of survival, but
that
it just seems kind of irrelevant to
that's and let me
my
add
own life. And
that's partially what it gave capitalism for. That's what it gave us money and the concept of profit for. So together with your egoism and this external force of the economy, the capitalist external force, this profit incentive, force you like we'd all love to just sit on a chair and just watch YouTube all day, right? But the economy forces us. It incentivizes us with the profit incentive to be productive, right? Our biological program, our hardwiring is to be lazy, kind of to conserve energy. It's a misprogramming because evolution, biology is too slow, right? But it is catching up. It's going the capitalist and said that's evolution. The invisible hand is evolution. The capitalist incentive is evolution, and that's kind of like what I want to. This is why I think this is true capitalism. It's
okay,
actually it's actually an evolutionary structure that's selected, and it's going to be refined again. All it needs is to get rid of democracy and refine money into reputation.
okay. We have covered a lot, and I see looks like we've gone on for about an hour and a half. So I don't know if this is a good place to wrap it up. I'm sure we could talk for like 10 hours if we wanted to, but
Yeah. But
um,
we got to produce, right? The economy forces us to produce.
well, I got to do what makes me happy because I'm an egoist and I don't care about the perfect being. I
But the
care about
capitalist
my own
forces
being.
you.
I am the perfect being. Or I want to be as perfect as I can be. That's what matters to me.
Like, you don't want to work, do you? You don't want to work tomorrow, right? You
No,
really don't want
actually, work can be enjoyable if you find a good line of work. I mean, that's what I strive to do is I want to find a career that's I enjoy doing.
Wouldn't you rather
Um,
be paid to do this?
well, I am paid to do this at
Oh,
least a
you
little
are.
bit.
Oh, yeah.
Not enough to that I don't have to do anything else to get paid for. So I do some other kind of work that pays most of the bills, but
Oh, okay. So it's not your primary profession.
well, in terms of time, it is like I spend most of my time doing something related to my YouTube channel,
Okay.
but I want to help. I want to grow my YouTube channel so I can eventually make some significant money, and I want from it, and I won't have to do other things
Yeah.
to make money.
Are you still recording?
Yeah, it's still recording.
Oh, okay.
So just to put a plug in for my own channel, if anyone out there wants to help me grow my channel so that can eventually make money at it, I would appreciate it if you would consider subscribing. And once I get up to 1,000 subscribers, I can apply to YouTube to have my channel monetized, and then that will help me make some more money. Right now, I got a couple people on Patreon who make some monthly donations, and I appreciate that. So thank you if you're listening. You know who you are. But I want to get more subscribers and get some more revenue from this. And because it's egoistic, it's good for my own life, but I hope it's also compatible with other people's interests. And I hope other people are getting some value from this and they enjoy watching some of my content at least. So I hope it's a win-win kind of relationship going on here. But anyway, that's yeah. So I'm wondering, what is the egoistic thing to do here? Is this a good place to end it? Maybe this is a good place to draw a line. But is there anything last thing that you wanna definitely make sure you get in before we end?
Yeah. Maybe just suggestions on maybe if we have a future talk, maybe we can talk about man, I really despise the Austrian school. I think they I don't know how Ayn Rand kind of compliments Mises. I think his all their analysis is biased and agenda driven. And that's kind of like I do respect Ayn Rand for. It does seem like she was trying to explain reality, trying to understand reality. And that's pretty much it. But be
Okay.
productive. That's true moral. Well, that's closer to morality than egoism.
Well, that's part
Maximize
of
product.
egoism on Rand's view. Being productive, or
Yeah.
productivity is one of the central virtues of the
Yeah.
objectivist ethics. And I don't know much about the Austrians. I haven't read them myself. I was just reading today, though, or today and yesterday, an article in a book about the Austrians and their relation to Rand's. It's in a book called Foundations of a Free Society,
Yeah.
which I have here. Let's see. It's
It's blurred out. Oh, there.
maybe we can,
Yeah.
it's
I see it.
the third volume in the Ayn Rand Philosophical Studies series, or Ayn Rand Society Philosophical
Yeah.
Studies series. And there's an article in it by Robert Tarr, which is it's titled Economic Theory and Conceptions of Value, Rand and Austrians
Oh,
versus the Mainstream.
oh, that's a book I'd like to read.
Yeah, I think it has a lot of good
Yeah.
articles. And Tarr talks in there about the different schools of economics, the classical school, Adam Smith, and then the neoclassical school.
Yeah.
And she associates those two, or not she, Rob associates those two, Robert Tarr, with uh, what Rand calls an intrinsic theory of value and a subjective theory of value. So Rand has this trichotomy of the intrinsic, the subjective, and the objective. Many people are familiar with two of those, the subjective and objective, but Rand introduces a third category of value. So she reconceptualizes the field of value. And what Robert says in that article is that the Austrian school implicitly has an objective theory of value, but they call it uh, subjective value, or at least some of their leading, I think Mises, at least in some places, subscribes to what he calls a subjective theory of value. And maybe it actually is subjective, even in Rand's sense of that term in some places. There's another article in this book by Robert Garmong, which makes that case that Mises subscribes to a subjective theory of value.
Oh yeah.
But maybe in other places or in other aspects, or for the most part, the Austrians have an objective theory of value, but only implicitly. That's not the term they use.
Uh,
And he thinks that's what makes their theory so good and line up so well with Rand's, is that they actually have in common this theory of value. Now, maybe you take a
it's
different view
yeah. I
and you
think
have a negative
quite
view of the
the
Austrians.
I think quite the opposite of that guy. I think Mises is trying to erase all objectivity from value. He wants to inject this extreme form of subjectivism in his economic analysis. And what this does, when you make value subjective, you make it impossible for someone to plan for someone else, even if it's for their own good, like for a parent for their child. You can kind of see his agenda here. He wants to make central planning impossible. He wants to make aggressing against somebody for their own good impossible. He wants everybody to leave everyone's decision making alone. He doesn't want anyone to criticize anyone's decision making. That's ultimately his agenda here, and it's disingenuous and dishonest. This is not how you start an understanding of reality. So I don't. I think he should be. This is why Mises should be what is rejected by mainstream economics. He tries to make value immeasurable. Like we can't determine the. This is where game theory comes in. I think game theory, the
Well, hold on, hold
language
on,
is.
hold on. The I just want to make a couple comments on what you said so far, and then you could say some more. So, you say he's you mentioned the term objective, but we haven't really talked much about what objective means. I think to assess whether he actually does, at least implicitly, support an objective theory of value, we would have to get into what exactly that term objective means. Does it just mean mind independence? I think that's a sense of objective that many people have heard, but there's another sense of objective where it involves both something independent of the mind, but also the mind's own processes. So if the mind processes reality in a certain way, if it evaluates reality according to an objective standard, but then again, what is an objective standard? That's something we haven't talked much about. So I think to assess whether he's actually on the side of objectivity, we would have to have a
You
larger
can you can
discussion.
you can look at all his work. You can see his conclusion. You know his agenda. You know he's trying. I know he's trying to erase all objectivity outside of value. And again, his agenda is in order to argue for laissez-faire economics. That's where his starting point is. He's working backwards from conclusions. He's starting from the point I want to reach laissez-faire capitalism. How do I argue for that? How do I argue that the state is in no position to tell another person what's good for them? Right. That's where he starts from, and he works backward. He perverts Menger's theory, just like Marx did Adam Smith and Ricardo's labor theory of value. So Marx perverted the labor theory of value in order to argue for exploitation of the worker. And Mises did this exact same thing to Menger's subjective theory of value in order to argue for the opposite, laissez-faire economics. And this is why both are are rejected or ignored in mainstream economics. These two are cults in mainstream economics because of their agendas are so palpable. And so game theory, this is what when I want to game theory clarifies all of this stuff, right? We know payoffs, which is true value, is objective. Evolutionary payoff is objective. Now, what goes on in our mind is expected value. That is part subjective, part objective because our experiences are objective. That's the data we process is part of our ultimate decision making. That is expected value. There's true value, which is payoff of a game. There's expected value, which is what goes on in the actor's mind. And then subjective value, there's very few things that are truly subjective, that are only dependent upon the mind. These are arbitrary things. This can only mean arbitrary. If value were subjective, we'd all be Neo in the Matrix. That's essentially.
But
That's
yeah, there
essentially.
is a sense of subjective where it means just pertaining to the mind. So, um, to give a very broad strokes overview of this trichotomy I mentioned before of subjective, intrinsic, and objective. I don't know what order I mentioned those in before, but the subjective pertains to in here in the mind. Intrinsic is out there apart from the mind, and then objective is kind of a hybrid. It's a relation of the mind to existence. So there's a phrase in another book I have here, Objectivism: The Philosophy of Ayn Rand by Leonard Peikoff. Um, Trying to get it where it's not blurry, his name. Anyway, he describes objectivity as, quote, volitional adherence to reality by the method of logic, unquote. I think I got that exactly right. So there's two elements. There's reality, but it's not just reality. It's volitional adherence to reality. So the mind has to be aware of reality in a volitional way. So there's two components that go into objectivity in the sense that Ayn Rand has in mind when she says knowledge is objective or values are objective. Um, so uh, this is a big topic, and we could explore many angles of it. But I just wanted to give that very broad overview of what distinguishes these three ways of thinking. You were saying something about subjectivity um, before I cut in. So
I
sorry if
I
I
don't
messed up the
remember.
train of thought.
It's okay.
But
I don't remember.
anyways,
Subjectivity is a dangerous thing. I think Ayn Rand maybe might agree.
yeah, I mean, she was very opposed to subjectivity if it means just going by your whims. I think that's a phrase she uses a lot to describe what it means to be subjective. Like if you have some whimsical preference for something, you want to do drugs on a whim or have promiscuous sex on a whim without thinking about the consequences. How is this going to affect my life as a whole? If you just whim worship, as she calls it, that's very destructive to your own life. And that's not good for yourself. So it's anti-egoist, actually. It's not good for yourself to just act on whims, on arbitrary emotional feelings that you have without thinking about whether it's without thinking through the consequences of your actions, um,
Yeah, I
which
think
would be the egoistic thing to do. You think things through, be rational. Rationality is a core virtue and the fundamental virtue, in fact, in Ayn Rand's ethics, to use your mind, not just act on emotion all the time.
yeah, I think the Austrian school conflates value. They want to make it seem like expected value is true value, but every time we make decisions, we try to predict the consequences of our actions. That's one part of the decision making process, and they conflate that process with true value. True value is the actual consequences that happen. We're trying to we're trying to use our knowledge base and our intelligence to process past data to predict the future, and that's what probably Ayn Rand's talking about. Objective, this interaction where we take an objective data from our past, we use what we understand, we use that to formulate how we understand the mechanical laws of the universe, or if there somehow there's some randomness or whatever, but we try to use all of that data to predict the future, and ultimately we use our the goals programmed into us by evolution in order
Mm.
in
Yeah,
order
so
to act.
the this comes back to determinism when you mention the goals programmed into us by evolution. So Ayn Rand doesn't think that our goals are programmed into us. She thinks actually the choice to live or not is our fundamental choice, but it's a choice. It's not something programmed into us.
I don't think I
And now
could.
it is programmed into other organisms like plants. They automatically uh,
I don't
act
you.
in ways that, just a second, they automatically act in ways which, as best they can, promote their survival. And then animals, non-human animals, they also automatically, non-volitionally act in ways to support their own survival. But for humans, survival is an issue of choice. They don't automatically have to do it, and they can commit suicide, most obviously,
I don't think I could.
tragically.
I don't think I could force myself to kill myself right now. I don't think you could either. Killing,
Maybe not
suicide.
right now,
No,
but if I'm in a
suicide.
certain condition, like if I am a terminally ill patient and
Yeah,
I'm gonna,
that's
then
evolutionary. This is all evolutionary programming. It gave us suicide when we're a burden to society. When we know we're a burden on the
well, it has
potential,
nothing to do with society. It's if
it
your own
does.
life is going terribly.
No, no. It
Like,
if you
I,
feel like you're absorbing more resources than you produce, the depression signal will you can even look this up. This is not something
well, I
debate
mean, some people
debatable.
might have that reaction. Like they don't. Some people might say, "Oh, I'm a burden to others, and I don't want to be that." Um, but even that, you might be able to interpret it. I mean, depending on the person, that might be an egoistic sort of view. Like the person would feel bad himself if he could only live as a burden on others, and it
Yeah.
makes him personally feel bad. And so, in a way, it's egoistic for him to say, "I would rather not live than have to live like this."
Yeah.
So
Even
it still could
extreme
be
pain.
egoistic.
Even extreme pain when you feel extreme pain from a serious disease. Evolution gave us cancer. It didn't want us to live too long because it's forcing us to have sex and change our genetic code in a better way. It doesn't want us as an imperfect being to be immortal. Cancer is a benefit to society in a
It
way.
seems like there's are there conflicting pressures here? Like it doesn't want us to be immortal, but it's also trying to make us be able to survive better and better. I thought that was the idea. It's
It
trying
doesn't
to
want
make this
us.
perfect being, but
It doesn't want us to spend too much time trying to make our current selves immortal. I'd just say sometimes, I'll just abbreviate what I mean, but that's what, because it just would take too much resources. It's like trying to build off an inferior platform. We have too many we have too many flaws to try to fix in order to fix. We can become cyborgs. We can add cybernetic implants. It probably doesn't want that. It probably wants us to discover a whole new platform like AI. This is you can get into this is where the ideas of the Terminator came into being. Maybe James Cameron had an inkling of what I'm talking about, but maybe the Terminators are the good guys. You can make a case. It'd be funny to like analyze movies from an evolutionary capitalist point of view like that, where the Terminators are the good guys. We could be the bad guys because we're emotionally attached to our current status. We're emotionally attached, but we do have a sense to try to improve. Evolution wants us to improve. We want to find a better mate so that we have complementary characteristics where our child is hopefully an improvement upon the last generation. And it gave us death. It wants us to die to compel us to pass on our genes as quick as possible. You have a sense of urgency. It doesn't want you to lollygag because there's a universal time limit on usable energy. See, it's like evolutions are.
it's,
It,
it's all it all seems well, it seems so anti-egoist, but I've said that many times. So
there's a lot of alignment in it. I mean, there's alignment, but again, now that deviation between the two, this is where evolution makes the decision. Is
I guess where
evolution
there
choose
is, like,
egoism?
to the extent there is a conflict between egoism and evolution, as you're thinking of it,
It's a form of
it's
altruism,
it's
isn't it? Wouldn't you define
it's
my ethic as a type of altruism when you're working for the benefit of this perfect evolutionary being? Doesn't that fit
yeah,
the
I
thing?
guess it would be a type of altruism.
It's a different type.
Like you're putting yourself,
Yeah, as
you're
a
putting
means,
this evolutionary process ahead
as
of
the
your own
end.
interests.
Yep.
It seems like that's what you think people should do,
Yeah. And by
whereas I
should,
don't
I mean
think.
what evolution's forcing us to converge to. So it's objective. It's not just. It's not just
But then
objective.
if it's forcing you to now, if that's like a metaphysical force, not like the political sense of force where you're coercing, but if you mean like we're necessitated to, then we get back to the thing, the idea of morality is not even an issue in my view, because when you're necessitated, you're determinant. We're coming back to the determinist idea. If evolution is determining you to do certain
In
things, then
compatibilism, your mind is part of the deterministic process. The choices you make are still determined. You don't know them, but they're still
well, they're
part of
not.
the
If your
determination
choices are
process.
determined, they're not choices. That's my view.
Uh,
That's like a contradiction in terms to say
it's just semantics.
determines choices.
It's ultimately just a semantic thing, but it's still
It's not
compatible.
semantic. It's
You're
not
you're making a
semantic.
choice. We don't know. I don't know what you're gonna do. I don't even know what I'm gonna do in the next moment. Right. I don't know what's gonna occur. I don't. There's too much uncertainty, so morality still applies. As long as uncertainties exist from our perspective, morality is still relevant. We still need to
Not
optimize
if
our
there's no
decision.
free will.
What's
I
that?
don't think uncertainty, like there might be uncertainty for an animal, for a dog or a fish
So you're
or a
you're certain
cat.
about everything. Okay, what are the lotto
No,
numbers?
no, no. I'm not saying I'm certain about everything, but I'm saying certainty is not a sufficient condition for morality. You might be uncertain, like a dog might be uncertain what's going to happen, but I wouldn't say that the dog is subject to morality or that morality applies to the dog, because I don't think the dog has choice. I think it's just
I I
acting on
I think morality.
emotions or programming,
I think
genetic
more.
programming?
I think morality doesn't. Morality applies to everything. I don't think. I don't think it needs consciousness to apply. I
Oh
think
wow, you don't even think consciousness is necessary. So like a
no.
plants could
Yeah,
they could
rocks,
more.
rocks.
Okay.
Even the material that will be part of the shell of. Let's say it's like a big
Wow.
like this perfect is a big robot. Whatever that the skin is, the shell of the skin of the shell is made out of. So whatever that material is, it should try to make itself known to us as the skin, so we put it together.
All right. You have a very different conception of morality than I have.
Yeah, it's kind
Um,
of it's a revolution in a lot of areas if it's correct. And of course, I know you don't buy it, but again, look into game theory. It's this is undeniable. This is the most rigorous logic you can have, not philosophical logic with fuzzy terms. There's no fuzzy terms in game theory. there's no all the deduction is forced. Everyone there's no debates like in philosophy. That's why you use so much. There's you can see the variation in philosophy because your language is not rigorous. That's why everyone's differing. No one can apply rigorous logic to any of the analysis. It's useless. Just throw all that away. You look at the contributions and advancements in game theory already. They've already done most of the hard work. Now all it needs is some kicking in the butt to extend it to this general evolution and find a general evolutionary stable strategy, which I think is to create the perfect evolutionary being. That's if you focus on that goal, you can be more efficient toward true
hmm.
morality. And if you deviate, remember this is not subjective. If you deviate, the more you deviate, the more punishment you'll experience. It's proportional. That's why you don't see
Okay.
people like jumping off cliffs that are productive. That's evolution's selection process.
All
But you
right.
do,
So how about we wrap this up? That
yeah,
sounded like maybe that could be your closing statement, or is there?
yeah, that's enough ranting for me.
Okay. Yeah. So we've got very different sets of ideas, and I guess anyone can look into this more. You can check out Evolutionary Capitalist channel. He's got a YouTube channel of his own. If you want to learn more about his ideas, and there's lots of content on my own channel, Dan Norton One. Thanks for coming on Evolutionary Capitalists and having this discussion.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on, Dan.
Sure thing. All right. Take care.